Man, I do love having conversations with people who really understand that success in business is about the people in the business. That's such the critical factor across the board in every kind of company you can imagine, whether it's building product or providing service, intellectual property, whatever it happens to be. The people are what make it happen. And I had so much fun and was just so inspired by Ernesto's perspective. I hope you guys enjoy this podcast episode as much as I enjoyed recording it, because this was a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing this, by the way. I appreciate you joining me.
No,
This is
no,
great.
it's my pleasure. I've been checking out some of your podcast, and I love your approach. And
Oh, thank you.
I find very intriguing your background. Being an engineer and having worked with in software and stuff like that, and then connected with the human component of organizations. That's awesome.
You that's the thing, is like software teams are people,
Of course.
and even though the stuff they output is all digital, you have to work through that people interface and figure out how. Sorry, that's my note taker that just popped in there.
Yeah, no problem.
You have to figure out how to optimize that interface, and so people are critical. Like that's, whether you're software engineering or sales or marketing or finance, customer support.
And I would argue that these days, now that knowledge is becoming a commodity because of what we have, available, that the difference is going to be how people use that knowledge, apply
Yeah.
it, distribute it, So I would argue that in these days, maybe we're going to become more human than we used to be, in
Right.
organizations at least.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting. The Industrial Revolution kind of took people who were used to doing what you could argue is much more human stuff in more agrarian cultures, right? And moved them into this more mechanistic, humans as robots factory setting. We don't need the robots so much anymore. And
Totally agree with you. I come from a background where, I used to be a serial entrepreneur first, and then for reasons that I cannot really comprehend, I was asked to join a large company for a project and manage large businesses, for that company or that conglomerate. And then at the end, I was offered a position, not operating businesses, but kind of in the staff, overseeing how to develop talent and connect people with their culture, so that you can, so to speak, thrust this value creation engine for companies, and it's through people.
Yeah.
I don't know if you love sports. I do, and it also amazes me how the same group of people that were in a losing streak, then the manager changes, or there is a change in how, and then all of a sudden they start winning. And it's the same people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's, we're talking about leadership. That's the value of great leadership, right?
Exactly.
Is how the leader approaches the team and gets them to change, right? And it's the human interactions that are happening, and really it's the leader's ability to get the people on the team to, number one, be intrinsically motivated, right? It's not just that you guys are paying me to play really well, but I'm like, I want this to go really well, right? And to figure out how to level that up, and also how to be vulnerable,
of course,
and take risks, right? And that's being able to build psychological safety at work is so important, and it's not easy, right? And so you have to do the work of building that trust with the team, so that all of a sudden you do have a winning team, even though before they weren't. Because the reason they weren't winning before was they didn't have the psychological safety, they didn't have the intrinsic motivation. Maybe they learned some better plays, but
and the counterintuitive reasoning behind what you're saying is that in the past, as a leader, you were told that you cannot really get too close to your people, right? because you are the leader and you cannot really be personal. And nowadays you cannot create trust and vulnerability if you are not
Exactly.
personal.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, yeah. And I wonder where that don't get personal came from. What was the logic behind advising people that way?
I think I'm not sure, and I don't have probably enough information to answer this correctly, but we come from a command and control system where you had your production lines and everything was in place.
Mm-hmm.
The environment didn't change that much. Once you get to have an advantage by scale or something, you could probably use that for a long period of time, and you don't really care about people because you have all the systems set. But all of a sudden, the last 10 or 5 years even, where things are changing very rapidly,
Right.
and your advantages are really not that long. All of a sudden you have to go back to well, where do I get this ingenuity and resourcefulness to compete?
Yes.
Well, it's through people. So you
Exactly.
have to change the model.
Yeah.
And I think that it was Taylor, right? Edward Taylor, I believe, the one who systematized and organized, and the one who was doing all these scientific ways of labor organizing. So that was the approach first, and it was very structured, almost inhuman. And then nowadays, of course, we cannot continue with that mental model.
Right.
And I would also, and this is something that I present in my book, this concept of the organization being a machine that was good for many years needs to evolve to see the organization as a living organism.
Yes.
A living organism means, made out of people who have aspirations, problems, challenges, and you have to play, with degrees of freedom. You have to allow some slack, and of course, you may fail at times and commit mistakes, but
Mm-hmm.
you cannot punish everybody just for committing a mistake. If it's an honest mistake, I think it's fine. But I think that is changing, although the impetus of the industry right now, it's a little bit tainted to the old model, and we are baby steps into the new one.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote the book, to try to see if I could provide some ideas there.
Which is awesome. And we need more voices talking about humanizing and especially people who've had executive level roles talking about that, because it's a very tactical viewpoint. And most of the time, folks from executive roles, they write about high level strategic stuff. And now you're completely flipping the script around, which is perfect, right? Because you understand the problem really well, right? Because if you didn't understand the problem really well, you would never be able to say it's a people problem, right?
And in business, everything is a people problem,
right?
At the core. What happens, of course, with public companies and organizations, they have to deliver make certain commitments. All of a sudden, it's a lot tougher to leave some space to breathe, because you don't want to run mistake. You don't want to take run risks or engage in anything that could go against your guide, for instance, for the year, and all of a sudden, and this is something that is awful, but it's the way it is. Every year, you have to create value, like if it was a 45-degree, line that goes up, and up, always.
Right.
And that's not the case in life. You have ups and downs. Sometimes you plateau, you learn, you go ahead, and that's why I named my book Regrowth, because I say we have to grow, but it's not really a 45-degree angle all the time.
Right.
So you have to regrow into and for that you have to go back to your core, which is your human component.
Right.
The problem is how you scale that. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Because with teams, you can be intimate and you can really be vulnerable and create trust. But when you want to design a journey where a large organization needs to go there, so it's more complicated. It's not impossible, of course,
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I've been doing that for the past 5 to 10 years.
Mhm.
But at the end, it's go back to the basics of what makes us human.
Yeah. 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 I think the challenge with any kind of scale is what is a system so that we can all have the same language. My world's been software development for 20 plus years, right?
Mhm.
And I started off doing agile software development. That the project management styles is called agile, right? And different companies, slight variations in agile, but we all have the same language, right? We all use the same system. And so when we talk about objects in that system, it makes it easy and scalable across thousands of people to be able to understand that. And I think it's the same thing with figuring out what's a repeatable recurring system we can use to have that human thing come out,
Mhm.
right? Where we all have the same kind of language. And in a perfect world, if I get hung up on something that I'm trying to humanize with my team and I can't figure out how to solve it, I can ping you and go, hey, Ernesto, you're really good at this stuff. I'm stuck in this part. How would you, coach me? How would you solve this problem, right? And I think because that's something we do in the agile world, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
get hung up in part of agile. I ping somebody who knows more than me about whatever it is, right? And I'm like, hey, you've done this thing a whole bunch of times. How did you solve this kind of problem, right? Having a system to do that with the human side of it that's got the level of behavioral detail so that anybody can do it is I
Mhm.
think is the missing piece.
It is, and that's why organizational culture attempts to become that kind of a human software, so to speak.
Right.
So it's the soft wiring of the organization that goes there. And so you go back to your basics, or in my case, I call it your creed,
Mm-hmm.
what you're all about. And that's where you find the answers. And of course, it is an imperfect system because it's always, challenged. But I really think that you can build something that works.
Mm-hmm.
And what is most important now is that in the past, culture was seen as being very tied to a particular strategy. So you as a business decide, this is my strategy. I'm going to be a low cost producer or whatever, and I'm going to have this, cutthroat culture about low cost, etc., which is fine until it doesn't work anymore.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah.
So what happens now is when the rules change, you have to really build a culture that is so-called change ready or
Yep.
adjustable.
Yeah.
At the same time, it has to be resilient, so that you can advance, but adaptable so that you can, expand.
Right.
Uh, and again, it depends on each a particular organization, but because I've seen companies that have a clear idea of where they want to go, and it's incremental improvement that will get you there. Fine, that's perfect. You can set up a system that works in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at now at many companies, organizations, they have created a position called Chief Growth Officer. So there is a person who starts trying to explore and doing things different, and maybe getting into territories that are uncharted, where you don't have capabilities, you don't even have consensus about what to do.
Right.
And the thing is that the culture that it's getting you, this incremental improvement is fine, but these same people need to have the capacity to extend if you're willing to go there.
Right.
So that cultural design changes depending on where you want to go.
Yeah. It's the as you're talking about this as a human or organic system, one of the things that we talk about all the time in our work is what are the values and priorities of the individuals. And you're talking about the creed of the company, right?
Yes.
Is figuring out what are the values and priorities of the company, and how do we make sure everybody's aligned with that mission. And if it has to evolve, if being super cutthroat and low price leader doesn't work anymore, then okay, do we need to change our values and priorities and do something a bit different? And then who do we look to that's already being successful in a space that we aspire to? And what do we learn from those models? Like, I'm always looking for people that are out on the edge of what everybody expects to have happen. Of like, I look for outlier data, right? From a bell curve, I look for the outside ends, right?
Yeah.
And things that one of my favorite examples of outliers is Ferrari, the car manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
Because number one, they've never had their cars go on sale ever. And they're always insanely expensive. And they have been since day one. And there's always, when they say, oh, we're launching a new model and we're going to make 800 of them, they've got 2,000 people lined up to buy them, putting money down, and they haven't even built one yet. And I'm like, that's a very interesting model, completely unlike Walmart.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. How do they do that? What are they doing? Who else operates like that? Or there's all these different things. I'm always looking for what of the stuff that somebody is doing can we learn from? How can we grow? And how do we bring the understanding of their stuff into our world? And like, I think it's interesting that like when Toyota wanted to bring high-end cars to America, they did the Lexus brand, because I think they realized that if they just brought in those higher end cars as Toyotas, nobody would buy them because it's the brand identification, right? Great solution. Their chief growth person did the research and figured out, wait a minute, we can't sell Toyotas at the price point that we want to, even though the exact same car is sold high end under the Toyota brand in Japan, right? Because markets operate differently. So I like, that's one of those things I look at. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. How do we have the growth person recognize that and see that? And then back to the human side, what's the values and priorities? How are we going to shift, right? What are we going to do? And I think that's the evolution of our business as an organism.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, growth, it's a byproduct of understanding what your customers need and want.
Right. Exactly.
And being able to provide a solution that is better in relative terms of what they can get, elsewhere.
Sure.
And that understanding, again, it's knowledge.
Right.
How well and sometimes you even have to know better their needs that they can express them, because some people cannot really express profoundly what they know what they want superficially, but sometimes they cannot really express what they really want. And then that understanding, it's interesting because that ability, it's an in-house ability in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I found fascinating when I wrote my book was that I learned, according to a McKinsey study, that in the US, companies grow at the rate of 2.8% a year. That's the average in the US. And this is previous, the pandemic. If you see that growth rate, it's going to take 25 years for a company to double its size.
Mm-hmm.
So just think about, you invest all that money, you run all these risks, you do everything right, and you're going to grow 2%.
Yeah.
So, and that's interesting. And then I saw another study by Bain that they say, well, and the interesting thing is that 4 out of the 5 reasons why companies do not grow have to do with what the inside problems within the company is not market driven.
Right.
So
exactly. Yeah.
So the market is what it is. There's going to be regulatory problems. There's going to be prices and shifts. Yeah, that's fine. But for 80% of the reasons why you're not growing have to do with the wiring of the organization, not necessarily what is happening outside. Right. So you put those two things together and say, no wonder. I mean, I have to work with my people to understand better and be able to, get this edge in the market
Right.
to compete. But it's an inside problem. It's not an outside problem.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And the other thing that for me was very intriguing, I have had the opportunity to talk to many CEOs of medium and large companies, and there is I always ask them this question: say, you're the team that reports to you, the C-suite. These guys, you know them very well. I mean, you probably handpicked them, or if they were there when you arrived, you approved that for them to stay, and you know them you trust them, right? Sure. What percentage of their potential do you think they are redeeming? In other words, what do you think that they are achieving relative to what you think they are capable of doing? Give me a number. And most people told me 50%.
Yeah.
So what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that people could probably, they are capable, they can do more, they can create more, they can contribute more. So you know what? But they are at 50% or even less. Why is that? Well, I don't know, bureaucracy, sometimes we have silos, the companies are complex. So you know what, but you are the boss. I mean, those things you're supposed to fix, right? That's your job. Yeah, but it's not that easy.
Right.
Well,
Right.
yeah, and so, well, what if we create a system that allows people to connect with their essential qualities, the things that they like to do and can do, and align them in a system that really releases all that energy that is dormant.
Right. Right.
And the question is, of course, what kind of a system is that, and how you can design a journey for a company to transform from where they are to that stage. And I'm saying this because, yeah, I mean, in determining that, there are three elements, basic three dimensions. One is your talent density. What kind of talent you have, especially in key positions. You don't have to have the most outstanding talent in every position of your company,
Mhm.
but you have to have extremely good talent in the key areas where your business makes a difference, because that's where you need your power.
Sure.
And then you have a culture that allows that to happen. But most importantly, you have to create a mindset
Right.
in people so that, their mental models, they are able to challenge their restricting beliefs so
Mhm.
that they can evolve. So the combination of those three things can be planned. And in my opinion, of course, every company is different, but you can design a journey to advance there. And when you think about potential, what is potential? Because if I say to you, listen, Bill, the Bill of 10 years ago, you had an idea of what kind of potential you thought you had, right?
Mhm.
But probably today, that horizon moved forward. And now with the things that you know how to do with
Oh
your
yeah.
experience, so that thing it's a moving goalpost.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and what makes you catch up and connect with who you are so that you can advance
Yep.
and play that game. That's what really interests me a lot.
Yeah.
That's my goal.
That's what you're talking about. There is an environment of a system, a culture of psychological safety.
Of course.
Here's the challenge with that I found, right? Is number one, the team leads. So here's a philosophical perspective that one of my first company founders gave me. And this was when I first started building my first software team. He said in one of our meetings early on, he told me I had more power in the company to help productivity than he did. And I said, wait a minute, I don't understand. Like, you're the boss, right? And he said, I don't have the leverage because you're with the team all day, every day. You get to have the impact every day because of your leverage. I don't, like, no matter what I do, I don't have that, right? And he's like, it's you, Bill, running this team. It is James running the sales team. It's Maria running the marketing team, and a woman whose name I can never remember running the support team, right? So like the four of you really have all the power in the company. I'm too disconnected, right? So you get to drive the productivity. My job is to give you whatever it is that you think you need to help your people operate better. he's the only executive that's ever said that to me, right? And I took that and ran with it. Like every other company I went to, I just assumed that I had all the power in the world and I could make stuff happen. But what's interesting is my peers wouldn't do that. Like I couldn't get them to see it my way because the executives didn't say it out loud, right? So you have to get the executives to go like to have the self-confidence, I guess, and the framing to be able to say that out loud, just to give people a mental, because you're talking about mental models, right? Like that is a very different mental model to carry, right? Versus the one that I hear all the time from people that we work with who say, oh, that's above my pay grade, right? And so, and that's another mental model, right? You have to be able to say, no, it's not above your pay grade, right? You have the knowledge, which is a thing that you keep talking about, which I think is perfect. If you have the knowledge, you've got to figure out how to bubble it up, right? Because you've got, like as the people creating the product and talking to the customers, we have insights into what the customers want, back to the whole growth thing, right?
Yeah.
That the CEO doesn't know, right? And won't hear. And if there's not a really easy channel for somebody on my team to go, we just got like this data or this explicit feedback, and now we've got a bunch of data, we should make a significant change in our product, right? I've got to be able to bubble that up to the leadership team and go, hey, we're going in a different, we're getting all these signals, we should change our direction. Are you guys cool with it, right? You have to have a lot of self-confidence in your people, psychological safety again, right? And you have to recognize on day one that the individual contributors don't trust their leadership. And so you have to build the environment of trust, and the executives, I go back and forth on this. It's either the executives have to be able to coach and train the team leads appropriately to be able to have that tactical conversation, or they need to bring in somebody who has done that and knows how to do that, while the executives focus on strategy. I think that's the kind of a system. I mean, that's what we're building. Yeah.
When talking about culture, there has been thousands of articles and books and everything about culture. And quite frankly, when I was set to design the culture for this large company, we're talking about 80,000 people. I was thinking, what kind of model am I going to be using? And I checked them all, and there are many, many approaches. Very complicated, by the way, most of them. Complicated in the sense that you have 12, 15, even 25 dimensions that you have to play with. I mean, it's really complex.
Right. That's crazy.
It's crazy. So, but I came up with a very simple idea of how to, approach this. And that's what I call the three determinants of culture. One is the creed. What are you all about?
Right.
It can be your values, your principles, your ideas, your purpose, whatever. You have a creed. So you have to have clear what is that you want. And that aligns sometimes with the strategy, or sometimes you have to, leave some slack. Then you have the context and how the context in the company may aid or limit what you want to do.
Right.
Because there are companies and we establish processes, right, and guidelines and procedures. And sometimes those are very restrictive, or incentive systems.
Right.
Your bonus is going to be linked to achieving this or that, or not making any mistakes or whatever. So if in your creed you say it's okay to make mistakes, but then you punish mistakes, it doesn't work.
Right.
So you have to make sure that what you say in your creed, it's reflected in the way the company operates in terms of the procedures. And then the third component is your leadership model. In this case, I call it stewardship model. And in that stewardship model, the very basic part of it is psychological safety. Has to be there. But together with psychological safety, I find that there are three elements that are important. One is the sense of ownership, of what you're doing. Second is the willingness to help others achieve success in your team.
Yes.
And the other one is ego versus truth, how you lead with ego. And you have to make sure that you go for truth and not for ego.
Right. Right.
Steve Jobs, which has a lot of lessons to learn, they say that he was always right. And he said, no, he didn't want to be right. He wanted to get it right.
Right.
And,
Yes.
and,
Yes.
and to get it right means open up to other ideas, somebody challenging your thinking. So yes, you want to get it right. And it doesn't matter that you have to be right. If somebody else has a better idea, that's fine. Let's do that. But if you don't have psychological safety, that will never rise.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
will never rise. So at least, I mean, you can add some other components to that model that I mentioned to you. But if you have a creed in place that it's coherent and aligned, you have taking care of the context so that the context does not diminish your goals, and then you have a leadership model in place so that the culture is living day to day.
Right.
And
Right.
it supports. Then you can get that thing moving,
Yeah.
and start progressing. And that's what I suggest, at least, and I think it works.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I'm curious, what got you started on this path of the what in my head sounds like humanizing the workforce?
It's very interesting because at first I started off small, small companies. I launched about 10 businesses, small businesses, very traditional businesses, by the way, nothing fancy, but I launched that. And always what made a difference in the way I was progressing was a people-related subject, right? I own, for instance, restaurants. And of course, the talent of a good manager, a good chef, etc., makes all the difference, because everything else is the same, right?
Yep.
And then I noticed that the limiting factor is always, people, and having people, in place, in the people doing the right thing in the right place, the right time, etc. And then when I moved into the corporate world, I say, it's exactly the same, but larger. Of course, there is more complexity, and if you have multiple geographies, you have the culture of different countries, and that it's kind of more complex. But I knew, and I've always wondered, how can you create the conditions for people to do their best? Is there a way? And that's a question that I ask myself. Is there a way in which I can create conditions for people to flourish so that they can do what they do best, right? If I pick the right people and I don't let them do the thing they know how to do, then it's not going to work.
Sure.
So how can I, create the conditions? And I noticed that at least in my experience, 23 something years in large companies, the very basic unit of performance is always the team. Is the individuals, but really, really is the team. So if you create the right conditions for a team to contribute, all of a sudden people achieve things that you never imagined they could. They even probably did not even imagine themselves they could. And I learned that, and I saw teams succeeding. Say, wow, what happened? What is happening in this team that made it different? And believe me, and sometimes you think, well, the leader, yeah, the leader counts, of course. But I've seen many times when you move a leader from a position and you put it in a different position, and fails. So why? I mean, in this previous position, this person was outstanding. And then I put it in a different context and it doesn't work. It has nothing to do with the person. And there is a combo always of individual and context that you have to align. So that you have circumstances and the context aligned with the person, then the magic happens. And that's what really moved me. And I say, you know what? I wondered if I could scale this. And in the job that I used to do prior to writing my book, I noticed that I was in charge of scaling the culture of the organization from 1 country to 18. And I started to notice how things improved in terms of the results because of that. And there is no really secret sauce. I mean, to be honest with you, it's really basic. It's just when people connect with what they are doing, you have certain essential qualities. And if you're able to sink in, what the position demands of a person in the team and what these people really resonates with, all of a sudden they just fly.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done, but has to do with the company purpose, of course, that's important. But then after that, you have to make sure that people are able to understand what moves them and what drives them and apply that into their daily jobs. And if you can do that, all of a sudden you achieve, unimaginable goals.
Right.
And I really like, seeing people succeed. I mean, it's really fulfilling when you are, guiding a team that achieves, great things. It's really invigorating. So that prompted him to say, well, maybe I can offer my experience and maybe I can design a framework and share it and see, who finds it valuable and promote that into the business world. Because I really think that the business world in the next years is going to change. Just think about this for a moment. Think about the last 5 years. COVID, supply chain madness all over the world, right? The war in Ukraine. You have all these climate change things, fires and stuff like that. And companies still need to do the job and still need to grow. Now, do you think that the next 5 years are going to be easier than the last 5 years? I don't think so.
Yeah.
For starters, now we have tariffs, right? I mean, this thing about tariffs and all this. So this is nonstop. I mean, there's always a really challenging issues that surround us that companies need to face. And there will not be a way to overcome that if it's not by leveraging the potential of your teams and your people. That's the only way to go forward, because companies really do not exist. I mean, if you go to a company at night when all the lights are off, there is no company. It's a building with desks, right? The company starts next day 8 a.m. when people get in. That's the company.
Right.
Yeah. So that is what really moved me. Say, you know what? And I really think, and this is my guess, that people get into this flow state when they connect with what they are meant to be. And if you can align your job with what you're meant to be, and you create this flow, it's just wild. Thing is that understanding what you're meant to be, it's really difficult. Because a company designs a purpose. You design that. A person discovers his or her purpose.
Right.
And it's very different. So, but discovering that, it's what if I find it also very intriguing. I've been coaching executives for many years, and you will be surprised how many people in their 40s or 50s still don't know exactly what they're supposed to do. I would say the majority is still on the journey to discover that. If you know what you're meant to be, run with it. I mean, that's great. But most people are in the process of finding that out. And that spark that guides your actions sometimes changes depending on your stage in life and what you have achieved and what you're interested in. So it's a non-stop journey. But, I'm getting into another territory, but I really think that companies will have to play with those elements in the future more so than they did in the past. Because if people are going to make the difference, you cannot really convince people to make a company richer, more profitable, just because you want, shareholders to be more affluent.
Right.
So there has to be some more powerful reasons for you to be there that connect with purpose. But if you notice, many companies are now demonized, right? And you say, you don't want to work with a company that produces this, and that because it's not good for, health or, whatever. So sometimes it's difficult to understand that some companies have a difficult purpose, because of the industry they play in. And still you can thrive there and you can be very happy.
Right.
So
right.
My point is that while purpose is very important and companies need to build it because that's your guide, you really have to look into what moves people, because they will connect, even if the purpose of the company is not perfect. They will do a fantastic job if they connect with their inner qualities.
Right. Right.
And that's in my case, that's what I'm here to do, to see if there is a way to explore that.
Yeah. It's back to intrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
That fundamental, if you can tease that out of people, and to your point a minute ago, let them know that it's okay to change. Because you started off as an entrepreneur doing smaller size businesses, right? And then you became corporate, and that's a pretty big shift.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. But you know what? There are certain, the common thread there, it's this sense of ownership. Like you were saying, if you believe that you can make a difference, and what your boss told you, I cannot agree more with that, because the big bosses and the C-suites are really far away from customers in the day-to-day operations.
Oh yeah.
Because they are doing many other things. So they try to be close, but and as a company grows, there are many layers and layers and layers, and the communication information does not flow really easy to that. So you had to really empower, the outer edge of the company to make decisions. Otherwise, by the time the information gets there, it's too late.
Exactly.
But you cannot do that if you do not create a system that plays with that idea.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of systems.
Oh yeah. I really think, and the way I look at this is of course a system.
Right.
And for it to be a virtual system, it needs to really support and have a positive loop. So I think that talent density impacts culture, because the more talented people you have, the culture starts to establish certain standards of performance that now become, what you aspire to be. Everybody wants to be in a winning team, right? If you like basketball, you may want to go to I want to play the Lakers, and or if you like football or whatever. So you always want to play with the most professional people. So talent is very important in an organization. You have to have the best talent, because that raises the bar for everybody. But then you have to have a system where that talent plays, and that informs the collective mindset of the company. Those beliefs that you were saying, the mental models of what is allowed and what am I supposed to do or not.
Right.
And I also suggested that it is important for companies to start encouraging perspective taking, in the sense that when you are in the micro and where you're doing your tasks and just working and solving problems, you cannot really see the whole system if you don't take a step back and say, let me see what's happening in the macro. So every now and then, of course, you have to be focused to perform, etc. But every now and then you have to step back and see, well, do I pivot? Am I staying here? What is happening? Because otherwise, the fog of war, like they say, won't let you see what is happening. And you just become obsessed with solving problems that may not need to be solved.
Right. Yeah.
So to get together with the mindset, I think that it's important for people to take perspective, to understand the big picture, and then go back into it with a sense of agency. Of course, that's the other component that I think is really important. Agency and reflection on what you do to see if it's driving you to your goal or not. It's very important. But you cannot do that if you don't try, learn.
Yeah. Do you, because a lot of what I'm hearing is the importance of psychological safety in there.
Yeah.
Do you have any insights from a behavioral perspective, like, because I always go to what is it people do, right? Like, how do you get the leadership to operate in a way that has, and you know, this is the stacks of leadership, right? Wherever you start from in the stack, but that has the individual contributors feel that psychological safety, because it seems like that's the crux, right?
Yeah.
Is if the individual contributors, if the people on, as you said, the edge, if they don't feel psychologically safe, then even if they learn something and they're like, oh, this is really interesting insight, right? How do you get what do you do to have the stack be in such a way that they're comfortable that they can raise their hand and go, hey, I just discovered this new thing. We should all talk about it, right? Like, how do you make that safety happen?
Well, thank you for asking, because one of my challenges was to deploy psychological safety throughout the company of 45,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
And where there was none, and we have to work, now with that component. First, you have to understand psychological safety can be taught. You can
Mm-hmm.
teach psychological safety. That's the first thing. Now, for that to happen, there are certain things that you have to, and psychological safety has two dimensions. From the boss perspective, the boss needs to allow that to happen. And from the contributor's perspective, psychological safety, they have to be willing to speak up so that that happens. Now, for them to speak up, of course, there has to be permission from your boss to participate. Otherwise, but
Right.
you have to work on those two elements, from the perspective of the boss and from the perspective of those who are going to be practicing psychological safety. What's going to happen? And oftentimes, bosses, first of all, arrive to that position because they are supposed to be experienced. They are know-it-alls. They probably have power and ego, involved in what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So it is important for the company to declare, or the head to declare, that psychological safety is a goal that has to be adopted, and this has to be practiced by higher C-suite, and all the leaders have to be committed, not just lip service, but really something that they say, because otherwise it's not going to happen.
Right.
So the higher level of authority has to be committed. And then the important thing to make it happen in the team is you have to go step by step. The first thing is you have to make sure that people feel included. Because if people do not feel included, they will not speak up.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to make sure that people are not only included, but that they feel free to participate and feel free to offer an opinion without fear of punishment, without fear of being reprimanded or just put down. And then the next level goes when people are not only feel to speak up, but to challenge the status quo. That's the third level. So you have to work level by level. So do people feel included, yes or no? Do people feel that they can contribute and speak up and raise their voice? And then, of course, people have, the capacity to challenge, the established ideas of the company. So you have to work in those three stages, one by one. Most importantly, from the perspective of the boss, for instance, in meetings, the boss has to be the last to speak. So
yeah.
you start a meeting and you say, listen, I'm here to hear your opinions. You don't speak a word first, because if you speak first, everybody's gonna, play along, and you don't want that to happen. And the boss, again, from the perspective of the boss, has to be, when the boss perceives that people are not really participating that much, he has to call people and say, hey, listen, tell me what you think. I see you're not really participating. Do you have any ideas? And really, actively search for opinions. And all of a sudden, you go step by step. At first, it's more difficult because people don't feel really, eager to say. And then as time goes by, second, third, fourth, fifth meeting, people start, speaking up a little bit more. And all of a sudden people are speaking.
Right.
Especially young, people that are the company, I've seen that happening many times. If you give them the opportunity to speak, they will take it. And then, of course, but there's a trick. When the time comes to make a decision, and once everybody spoke, then the boss has to make a decision. And it may not represent what everybody said, which is fine. But there has to be the understanding that psychological safety does not mean that whatever you say is going to happen and everybody's going to be right all the time. It's just that you will have your opportunity to contribute, but somebody has to make a decision, and then you have to commit. So, and with that understanding, that's fine. You don't feel against your boss because your idea didn't count. You say, well, maybe next time, this is going to happen. And sometimes the boss explains the reason why. Sometimes it's impossible because it's just, your job to make decisions and to make tough calls.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think that you have to go stage by stage. And again, it's important to, if you go to an office and now with Zoom calls is different, but in conference rooms, typically the boss goes at the heading of the table, and then all the lower people are in the back. You have to change that setting.
Right.
You have to really make it more easygoing, to break all these barriers that convey authority or that convey, I call the shots and nobody,
Right.
I'm in the Olympus and I'm just throw fire from my position. Has to be another, and the important thing, that's what I mentioned to you before. Ego is a really, really important piece.
Right.
Because psychological safety can contribute as long as you have a healthy ego, in the sense that you are not stuck with, I'm the boss and I'm always right.
Right. Yes.
But I want to be right. I want to get it right, not be right.
Yeah. Part of that, I think, is it's self-confidence, right? Because if you have a lot of self-confidence, you don't have to be the voice that has the right answer all the time. And you want everybody else's thoughts because you know that getting it right is what's important, and I think the trick there, the challenge is that you have people who don't have that level of self-confidence, and because they don't have the self-confidence, if they're in a leadership role, they might not be comfortable hearing other people's perspectives, right? So it goes back to everybody. Everybody has to have psychological safety. Yeah.
And you have to work also, building on the self-confidence part that you were sharing. You have to build also on certain beliefs that bosses typically have, because the boss says, well, if I don't call the shots, I'm not the boss, right? I'm supposed to be the boss, and that's what they pay me for. So that's that. And if I'm not seeing that way, probably my position is going to be, it's going to be risk for my position. And the self-confidence part, it's important. I've often shared this idea with bosses to make them more self-aware. Say, you know what? You're not going to be promoted and getting to higher positions by scaling yourself to that. You're going to be promoted when your team pushes you up. So if the team pushes you up and all of a sudden everybody and your team creates, very good ideas and gives very good results, naturally, you're going to be pushed up into that. Because if you work with that mental model, that I need to allow and enable my team to push me up, you open all the valves for that to happen.
Right. Yep.
And that means, of course, allow people to contribute, but being confident that you are not at risk if they do that.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Yes. And that, I think, that plays into how to work. And this is tough, especially because when you are in the moment to transform from one state to the other, you have to all of a sudden work with people that were used to play along certain rules, and now you have to install new ones.
Right.
And that
right.
that part, I'm not gonna, it's tough. You have to work with that, but it can be
Right.
done.
Yeah.
It can
Yeah.
be done.
It's the same guy that told me that I had all the power. He also in another meeting said that my job was not to write code anymore, because it's what I'd been doing, right? That now my job was to make sure everybody else was highly productive at writing code and happy about it. And that he didn't care if I wrote code ever again, because my responsibilities were different. I need to change my mental models. And now, I need to go learn some new skills, right? To be able to make that happen, help the team operate better. And that was because he was so explicit about that. It made it easier for me to understand that my responsibilities were so different. And I look back and I'm like, I'm really glad we had the conversations that we did, because it helped me to change my mental models, and that drove how everything else went. When the mental model changes, you're like, oh, wait a minute, now I've got to shift everything else. And that's to your point. I got to rise up because the team did amazing work, and my job was to help them make that amazing work happen. And yeah.
But but interestingly, if it was not for your boss who allowed you to do that and kind of guide you into that path, it probably couldn't have happened.
Right.
And this is something that you say, well, companies need to be really pay a lot of attention into conveying these ideas.
Yes.
Into establishing, this creed where this is the way to be.
Yep.
I always say, when you look at culture, culture means you have a uniform way to see things, but you have to allow for diversity, especially diversity of thinking, and not to conform really to just to a square.
Right.
You have a certain set of guidelines, but then you have the freedom to move within those guidelines to contribute, because otherwise, when cultures are too constricting, all of a sudden it defeats the purpose of being flexible. But you can play in along the line of we allow this to happen, we encourage this to happen, and you have to declare it,
Right.
so that people start building on that and becoming better at it.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that seems to be missing, because I hear complaints about this a lot, is having a real consistent and structured understanding of what it takes to get promoted and what the responsibilities are. And that way people can make their own choice about where they want to go. Do you want to lead teams and manage people, or do you want to dive deeper into the technology and be a more empowered individual contributor who works in broader contexts, right? Or even, you become the architect who knows everything about these three things. And so you become a very high-powered individual contributor, but that's a different path than leading teams, in
the company I worked for, we developed programs for leaders, so-called emerging leaders and high potential and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we noticed that it was very important also to build and develop people who are in technical positions, or people who want to thrive into specialized knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and who may want or not assume positions, to leading teams, because they are very interested in solving different kinds of problems. And
Sure.
by the way, that area is so key for a company, because competitive advantages traditionally depend on these people, so otherwise but to my surprise, when we started developing these programs with very, very important institutions, such as MIT, for instance, I had a program for 300 people, technical people at MIT at some point. It was interesting that this cohort also wanted to learn about leadership
Sure.
because they were not probably, they say, you know what, maybe I haven't been exposed enough. Maybe I can learn a little bit more about it. And then we start playing with both areas, and it really helped us quite a bit. It created a lot of value for the company actually, because the projects they then after that they pursued created millions of dollars of profits. But it is interesting because you can build a platform where a person that is specialized can be developed, and it is interesting how that can be complemented with certain leadership aspects.
Sure.
As that make the life easier.
Definitely. Yeah.
And that's a different ballgame than the typical leader who is going to assume a geographies or functions or whatever. What we normally call the guys who call the shots in terms of capital allocation, strategy, organization design, or whatever. It's different.
Yeah. So interesting. It's so interesting how, well, actually, you started off doing small companies, and that gave you the human perspective. I started off in startups, and most of my career I've spent in startups, which are, smaller, right? Even though I've spent time at bigger companies. But the people thing always struck me as being, as at the startups, like that's what makes it work, is your people. It's and everybody has pretty high degree of psychological safety. They're definitely intrinsically motivated, and everybody gets the company mission. So all those things that you're talking about, that's why startups work, the ones that work. Yeah.
If you look at startups, they start off with that specific description you shared right now. They feel safe to contribute. There is a team of brothers. They work, etc. Paradoxically, for a startup to scale, it has to put systems in place to organize work,
right,
and to wire work. And then once the startup establishes those systems and time goes by, those systems will inhibit the component part, the human part, to be there. So that's why I was telling you at the beginning, we have to design, especially for startups, but also for big companies, you have to leave some space for adaptability.
Right.
As part of the design of your company, because you need systems to scale. I mean, there is no question about it. But you also have to have the leverage to change those systems when they stop working, and reverting to the people side.
Right.
So that the next wave becomes possible.
Yeah.
But most companies establish systems, and then they are victims of the systems they established.
Right.
And that has to do with limiting the capacity of people to contribute, quite frankly.
Right.
I found that people have a very strong developmental drive always, and people are really want to contribute. It's us, who limit that, and we have to find ways to break off that cycle.
Right. Yeah, it's the feedback loop.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop.
Yeah, you need the feedback loop. Yeah.
And it starts with the capacity, as you were saying. If there was no psychological safety, you wouldn't be learning about these things that you have to, to change, just because they will never get to you.
Yeah. It's such an interesting. We could talk about this all day.
but I think that for large organizations, the paradox is, what do I do?
Sure.
Okay, I want to change, and I have what I have. I have the people that I have, and I cannot really replace them all. I cannot replace. So you have to start flying, with what you have. And I attempted, at least in my book, to say, well, you have to have 4 steps for that to happen. In small companies, this is going to be easier, but in large companies, it takes more effort. The first thing is you have to be serious about recognizing that you want to leverage your people's potential. That means, are you serious about playing into the human part or not? Because some people say, yeah, I'm serious, but they're not really committed. So the first thing is, and this is a precondition, if you're not really serious, it's going to be tough.
Right.
Second thing is, do you have an idea of where you want to go as a company? Are you going to play close to your core, or you're going to play further from your core.
Right.
If you're going to play further from your core, the vessel that you have to design has to be much more adaptable and flexible than if you're going to play closer to your core.
Right. Right.
And for doing that, there's going to be, you're going to take bigger risks.
Right.
In terms of, what you do. So where you want to go, it's very important. The third step is, okay, now I have to teach leaders to understand that the organization is a system and it's a living system. It's not a machine.
Yep. Yep.
You have to optimize certain parts, yes. But if you think that it's a machine, by optimizing the parts, you sometimes suboptimize the whole.
Right.
So you have to understand that, and this means really committing to this is people, this is a living organism, and it has to be adaptable. And then the fourth step is to create a system based on talent, density, culture, and mindset to move forward into what you want to achieve. And that, in a nutshell, is what I propose for a transformation journey. It's much more complicated in real life, but it can be done.
Right.
It
right.
can be
Of course.
done.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that I believe has limited capacity of leaders to recognize the human component of their people is the fact that you cannot see the human component in a balance sheet,
Right.
or in a profit and loss.
Yep.
And this is a paradox, right? Everybody says, people are the most important asset and stuff like that. But you see a balance sheet and you say, well, tell me where people is. In which slide I find people?
Yeah.
You don't find there, because it's baked into the result. It's baked into that.
Yeah.
So you have to recognize that balance sheet, it's not really fixed assets and cash in hand and whatever. It's the result of people working.
Right. Right. Yeah. We need a balance sheet that's got some other parts in it.
Yeah.
It's the human balance sheet, right? It's like because I'm so focused, I'm always thinking about intrinsic motivation, psychological safety, and those are hard to measure in an objective fashion. Like there's no rating for psychological safety, right? Like,
no, because it's an intangible.
Right.
It's an intangible.
But what you can do is you can say, on day one, how many people from my team regularly contribute to problem solving, to ideation, to design, whatever, right? And then on day 100, how many people contribute? And having a game plan for how to make that happen, right? Because then you go, oh, well, now on your spreadsheet, right, on your human balance sheet, you start off and you've got like 10% of our workforce is contributing to solving problems and ideas. And at some time in the future, you get, oh, now we have 17% of our workforce is contributing, right? Because people feel more psychologically safe, right? For me, in the software world, because in Agile, we use story points as a metric for tasks. Part of what I look at is team productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I know from experience now is that as their psychological safety goes up and as their intrinsic motivation goes up, their productivity goes up. And so I can inherit a team and I can watch the people on the team over time get more and more productive. And at the same time, what's happening is they're moving more in line with their intrinsic motivation, and their psychological safety is going up because the people that previously didn't talk in the meetings, they're starting to raise their hand and go, I've got an idea, and I don't know if it'll work or not, but what if we blah, 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 right? And so for me, that's a metric that's not on the balance sheet, right? Like nobody outside knows, like the executives outside of the CTO, nobody knows. that, oh, my team just improved their productivity by 40%. Only it wasn't just, right? This has been 6 months of little tiny increments every day, right? We need that for everything.
And you touch a very interesting thing that I've given a lot of thought. How do you measure this?
Right.
There are KPIs, and you can put some KPIs, etc. And it's important. You really have to have a way to assess what is happening.
Mhm.
But I believe it's a combination of certain KPIs that helps you measure, and then you have to have a way to read what is happening in the
Sure.
company, because sometimes the KPIs do not really tell you the whole story.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
You have to complement that with another way to read how this is advancing,
Right.
and
Right.
and it's directional. Sometimes you say, well, do I have to, survey the whole company, or do I, do that, certain groups or certain kind of people, certain demographies? You have to start designing that, and it's fascinating because we need to have an idea of where we're standing, or where we want to go, and how we're making progress. Because
Sure.
otherwise, you will not be able to. But
Right.
there has to be a way to complement quantitative and qualitative approaches, because sometimes you get stuck in the numbers, and it happened to me.
Mhm.
And you have, especially when there is a bonus attached to this.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah.
Because they say, I was supposed to meet 1.15 score, and I fulfill a 1.11. So how much better is a 115 compared to 111? It's just 3 decimals, but then you didn't make the cut, and then you lost your bonus. So
Right.
you get into discussions that are not really worthwhile. Having said that, it is really important to have a way to assess progress,
Sure.
because that's
Sure.
that's the only way to know if you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And interestingly, when you're going to buy a company, you're willing to recognize that, that intangible. And there is a line for intangibles, actually, because if you were to buy, I don't know, Google, you would say, wow, I'm not just buying assets, I'm buying here knowledge, I'm
Oh,
buying
yeah.
talent. So and the ones who sell are going to put a price on that,
Sure.
because so when you buy, you recognize it. But interesting, when you operate, you don't. I don't know why it is that way.
I think it's back to balance sheet, right?
Yeah.
And until people start to be explicit about the people, and we're successful because of the people, and here's what the people are doing that's driving us forward. When you have that as part of the standard conversation, then it becomes a recognized metric, and then we can start talking about, oh, how are we making this? Because my experience has been that when all the people are operating well, the company's more productive, and you make more money. Like,
Oh, yes.
it's very simple. Also, people take less mental health days, and so just by definition, that's another day of productivity that I get out of somebody on my team, right? But I think it's, what you're doing is a really, really good awareness booster for executives to start thinking about, oh, the people aren't hardware. They're complicated, and they're super important. And if we don't start to figure out how to optimize that part of the business, we're going to have problems. Because I'm going to go on a limb. This is a very risky thing to say. Every company that fails, the first thing that happens is the leadership forgets about the people.
Yeah.
And then the people don't want to work for the company anymore, because the leadership's not taking care of them. And the quality of their work goes down the tube. And then the quality goes down, the volume goes down, the sales go down, company dies, right?
And you touch one of the things that I have heard many times. You have who has priority, making money, shareholders, customers, or people in the company. How do you arrange this priority? Typically, you start with customers, and then shareholders, and then people. And some people would argue it's the other way around. You have to take care of your people because your people take care of your customers, and your customers
Yep.
generate the profits for your shareholders. So people have to be first. But
Yep.
it's not an easy topic, because in companies, especially when you have to report quarterly,
Sure.
and I mean, all of a sudden it's forget about people. I mean, I have to meet my goal, and if I have to change or do whatever it takes, so the system is really, it's complicated. You have to have a long-term view
Right.
for these things to happen.
Right. This is so Patagonia, the clothing company, they're privately held, and they have refused. Have you read "Let My People Go Surfing"?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so the guy that founded Patagonia, this is his leadership philosophy, and he puts people first because he believes that people are the most important thing for the company. He has refused multiple times to go public with the company because to your point from a minute ago, he has said the whole shareholder value thing is actually a bad model, and that the reason that Patagonia is so successful is because we focus on our people first, and we do all kinds of things to empower and enable and help our people, and in turn they do amazing work for our company. And so, you know, that's to me, that's one of those outliers that I look at, kind of like I look at Ferrari, and I go, oh, wait a minute, those guys are crushing it over there. They're doing an amazing thing, and they're not playing by the rules that other people play by. They're still making billions.
Yeah.
So somehow they're getting it right.
You know, Chobani, the yogurt is another example. We heard about this, but they are also connected with their people, and they have delivered outstanding results throughout time. I really think, people think, what is going to happen now with AI, right? I mean, people are not really going to count that much because of AI is going to take over. I really think it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Think about this. You have a company A and company B, right? They compete. They have similar assets. Now they're going to have AI, both companies. Maybe company A would get an edge because it got AI faster than the other one, but the other one is going to catch up. And they're going to have the same AI both.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to neutralize themselves.
Right.
What's going to make the difference from company A to company B to winning the market? Well, the remaining factor, which is people.
Yep.
Even if we have to rethink how people are going to, work under these new rules. But what is going to happen is that AI really is going to be making knowledge table stakes for companies in competition.
Exactly.
And the differentiating factor is going to be people.
Yeah.
The thing is, how are we going to play, with this? Still remains to be seen. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I really think that we should double down on our humanization efforts to win in the market. Otherwise, we will not be able to win.
Yeah, I think doubling down the humans is definitely I 100% agree with that. Yeah, every because it's funny, you look back over the history of the Industrial Revolution, and people kept saying, oh, this technology is going to completely change everything. But then to your point, all of a sudden everybody has it.
Yeah.
Right. And it is table stakes, and it's back to being the people again. And
exactly.
there's even examples where companies that went all in on the technology and totally forgot the people, they died really quickly. Right. And so it's one of those, it's such a blind spot. It's like this obvious glaring blind spot, it's because it's not on the balance sheet. It's not on your quarterly public statements that you're making, right? And nobody wants to talk about the impact because they don't have a system like yours, right?
That is the problem, is that since people it's complicated,
Right.
There are no, pure tones. There are always things and different approaches and perspectives, and it is fine. This is the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
Because that's when you get, diversity and different perspectives and different ideas, and that's what keeps you moving. But it's not really easy to communicate, as you were saying, when you're sharing results with the markets. it's really interesting to you talk about your market share, how many plants you opened, and what other markets you're approaching, and things like that, which is good.
It's okay.
I was going to say it is difficult to communicate that with the markets, but truth is, there has to be a different way to account for the value people are delivering.
Sure.
Because if we don't do that, it's going to be very difficult to assess how better they are.
Right. Yeah. Yep. I just looked at the time and realized that I've taken an extra almost half an hour of your time. And I'm sorry.
No. I'm sorry.
An amazing conversation. Yeah. No,
you just got me started and I couldn't stop.
No, but it's perfect. Yeah, because you and I are looking at the same problem from, I'm thinking extremely tactically, right? Like right at the team level. How do I train team leads and individual contributors who might want to be team leaders to build that psychological safety, to get the intrinsic motivation out, to help the people be aligned with what they want to be doing, that of course aligns with the company's goals.
The secret sauce is the same. It's just two different perspectives on how to play that.
Exactly.
You're playing the guerrilla approach.
Yes, totally.
And I am playing the air fight approach.
Exactly.
But it depends on how you want to do it.
Yeah.
But
I think we can be great, amazing allies because we're both looking at the same thing.
Yeah, you're boots on the ground, and I'm trying to fight the war from the air.
Beautiful.
But anyway, it's been a fascinating conversation. Really, really.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, I really appreciate your time and the conversation. It also, it really is very satisfying when you see another person from another field, another perspective, coinciding or kind of sharing ideas.
Yes.
Because this is timeless, actually. What we're discussing, and I really think that the time has come also for this to be the mainstream of doing business.